啦，亦夠人啦。咁正式開會。咁今日個會議咧係諮詢。
Thank you for coming to the joint meeting of the ITBB and the CIP. The chairman of the ITBB, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, had agreed that I shall be hosting this joint meeting. Do members have any objections? All right. Can we invite the administration team into the room, please?
歡迎各位。
Thank you for coming today. Today we have deputies. We have the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Mr. Edward Yao, Permanent Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Communication and Creative Industry, Mr. Cameron Leong, and Deputy Secretary, Mr. Edward Cho, and PAS for Commerce and Economic Development, Mr. Tony Yip, and Office of the Communication Authority Assistant Director Support, Mr. Sam Lee. And you can see the administration paper, LC paper number CB1 bracket 1873/191801, as well as the background brief provided by the Secretariat, CB bracket 1873/181902. The CDB had come up with a presentation. So allow me to do an opening, then we will go to the slide. The P2P telemarketing calls is nothing new in this chamber. I remember last April at the panel meeting, the overwhelming majority of political parties and members have urged the government to legislate. Now we promised that since there's a wide consensus reached by LegCo, so we shall undergo the preparation work. And for the meantime, we have undertaken studies and decided on the direction. And to reduce P2P telemarketing calls nuisance, we can deploy the same framework on existing provisions, which is the UEMO, the Unsolicited Electronic Messages Ordinance. Well, the way the ordinance works, well, it has been 10 years of operation experience and shown to be effective. How can it be applicable to the P2P telemarketing calls? We see that it could be a good starting point. Thus, today, the legislative framework parameters will be based on the UMEO. And since today this is a joint meeting, I hope that the two panels can provide clear direction for the government, that whether we shall go to legislative approach and whether we shall adopt this reference framework. Well, since they have been discussed extensively in LegCo, so rather than further consultation, we decided to come up with a specific direction on a legislative framework. As of you members all agree, the next step is easy. So we shall begin drafting the law. Then the legislative proposal will come to LegCo for a second reading and Bills Committee for scrutiny. So if there are other differing views at the joint meeting on whether we should legislate at all, or the framework, if we see any major flaws, of course we'll go back to drawing board. But I hope that you can provide a clear inclination to the government. At the Finance Committee, some members have strong views on this. Thus, through the discussion that different political parties and those from different constituencies can provide an overall direction for the government for the next step. And now I'll defer to my colleague to walk us through this PowerPoint. Thank you, Mr. Yao. And who will make the presentation? Mr. Tony Yip. So I would like to provide a major parameters on the proposed legislative framework. First, I should give you some background. So the UEMO has been fully implemented since December 2007. We regulate all kinds of unsolicited electronic messages, including email messages, fax, and pre-recorded phone messages. Okay, see that after it took effect, those UEMs and the P2P calls and complaint and report numbers has been dropped. In 2017, the government had conducted a public consultation on the strengthening regulation of P2P telemarketing calls, and on the 2018 April 9th, we have briefed the findings to the ITDB panel at LegCo. The consultation have shown that there are strong demand for the public to legislate the regulation. So the government decided to regulate P2P calls through legislation. Well, we found that the unsolicited P2P calls are similar in UEMs that are sent through emails, messages, fax, and pre-recorded phone messages. So we suggest that the regulatory framework in the UEMO to be suitably extended to regulate UEM unsolicited P2P calls. We also adopt this opt-out mechanism. If the phone users have registered their refusal to accept P2P calls and without giving express consent, and also through the P2P register, the promoter is not able to call this particular caller. And the scope of calls cover will make reference of the Hong Kong link definition under UEMO. So it would regulate calls made from Hong Kong or abroad. And there are 5 categories of Hong Kong link. First, the message originates in Hong Kong. These messages, of course, would definitely be included. And second, the individual or organization who sent the message or authorized the sending a message is an individual who is physically present, an organization carrying or ticket activities in Hong Kong, or a Hong Kong incorporated company. Well, let's say it's been authorized a company to send the messages, so that will be seen as a Hong Kong link. And C, the telecommunications device used to access the message is located in Hong Kong. Let's say a computer or a phone. If they accept that, receive that in Hong Kong, they will already be bound by the proposed legislation. And for the registered user of the electronic address to which the message is sent is physically present in Hong Kong or is carrying on the business or activities in Hong Kong, there will also be under this ordinance as well. And E, the message is sent to an electronic address allocated or assigned by the authority. In other words, that the fax or the phone number assigned by the communications authorities. And fourthly, we shall only regulate P2P calls of a commercial nature. So as reference to the UEMO, the P2P calls must be of a commercial nature to fall under the regulatory scope. In other words, it would, in the course of furthering of business, to offer, to supply goods, services, land, interests, or provide a business or investment opportunity. Let's say for the provision of public service, like the police and ambulance and urgent calls or the calls for donation from charitable organizations and calls for academic research from education institutions which are not considered to be commercial in nature, they will not be regulated in the proposed amendments. And we shall also propose setting up a register for a PTP calls or do not call register, so that those who don't wish to accept PTP calls would register the number. For the registered number, without prior consent and still received this PTP calls, thus the phone user can report to the authorities. The way it works will be similar to the WEMO practice, in which the public can call a free of charge a hotline through a free interactive voice response system. And a telemarketer must set up a subscription account to the register and download the numbers for printing their calling list, unless with the prior consent of the caller, otherwise could not able to call that particular person. For the calls format, it shall make reference with the UEMs, and since we shall suitably adopt and amend the existing control measures, the proposed major requirements are: for one, they can't make PTP calls to telephone numbers that are listed in the register for PTP calls. And two, even if the number is not on the DNC register, they cannot conceal the calling line ID. So the recipient must know that what number is calling from.
嘅時候呢，
Thirdly, to include accurate caller information in the calls. We've taken into consideration that we are looking at telephone calls, and therefore the caller should display in either English or Chinese the identity of the caller and his identity and the purpose of his call. Fourthly, to cease calling those telephone numbers, the registered users of which have made an unsubscribed request within 10 working days after such request has been made. And as said earlier, if the registered user had registered made the DNC register, then it is a duty to ensure that the unsubscribed requests made are recorded for at least 3 years. So we are actually making reference of the rules under the OEMO and apply them to the regulation of P2P calls. And next, if the promoter has the consent of the registered user, then even if when the number is in the register, so again the consent will need to be either verbal, in writing, namely that the caller would need the recipient would indicate his consent to allow the caller to continue to make calls to promote his goods and services. As I said, this is actually similar to the arrangements under the OEM ordinance. In terms of enforcement and sanctions, we are now proposing to apply the enforcement arrangements under the OEM. First of all, we would propose a notification notice. That is, if we discover any breaches, if any caller should make a P2P call to a number which is on the DNC list, and if this is confirmed, the authorities has reminded him not to do that, then an enforcement notice will be sent to the caller to remind him not to call the numbers, and non-compliance of the notice would be an offence. For the first-time offence, we'll make reference of the mechanism under the OEMO, namely a fine of $100,000. For the second offence, $500,000. Under the current OEMO Section 3, in Section 3, there is also a ban on the use of the apps for the harvesting of telephone numbers. So we will ensure that the such callers will not rely on this means in order to protect the public. Given that these offences are of a more serious nature, especially if they were to collect large number of electronic addresses or telephone numbers through such telephone number harvesting software, if the law enforcement has sufficient evidence, then prosecution will be, initiated, and once convicted, the offender will be fined $1 billion and imprisonment of 5 years. I think we've said many times that in the light of the experience of enforcing the OEMO, we envisage that in future when we enforce the regulations, we will encounter difficulties. For example, the complainant may not be willing to testify in court, and also it's difficult to actually record the content of the numbers. If it were, for example, if the law enforcement and the public will find it very difficult to record the voice conversation in order to serve as evidence. And also in dealing with calls from outside of Hong Kong, we may need cooperation from other jurisdictions. For example, we may need to build up a reporting and referring mechanism with those jurisdictions, but it will depend on the actual circumstances and the law enforcement in those jurisdictions. We also make reference to the current ordinance, and we propose to we will also expand the terms of reference of the appeals mechanism. And in terms of public education, we are now planning a public education campaign targeting at senior citizens. As the Secretary said, if our proposal is accepted by the majority of members, we'll proceed to draft the ordinance and collect members' views, and we will submit the bill to LegCo for scrutiny as soon as possible. Thank you. Members may now ask questions. A total of 6 members have put up their hands, and they are Chen Jinying, Xiu Ka-fai, Ma Fong Kwok, Charles Mok, Wong Ting Kwong, and Elizabeth Quat. May I propose that each member has 4 minutes. We're scheduled to finish at 11:30. Mr. Chen Jinying. I think unsolicited calls has caused a lot of nuisance to the general public. In 2017, the government already conducted a public consultation, and business chambers and the public also support, self-regulation. They object to legislation. But public believe that only by legislation can we deter such unsolicited P2P calls. And because of that, the government is now proposing to introduce the legislation against unsolicited P2P calls, and to propose a DNC mechanism together with the setting up of a DNC register. If people don't want to be, affected by these unsolicited calls, and then one would have to register the number under the DNC register. So if the proposal were, and those are according to the government, how many people would register? Would there be 1 million, 2 million, 3 million? Is it the case that if there were 1 million people who have registered, the government can then take action against these unsolicited P&P calls. And after someone has received such unsolicited P2P calls, the public will still need to lodge a complaint and testify in court. So the target of the legislation originally should have been the caller, but now the burden is on the general public to register and to complain. Compared with unsolicited electronic messages, the P2P call, for the P2P calls, it is very difficult in the course of the voice conversation to actually, make a record as evidence, and it is difficult to actually to trace the identity of callers. So therefore, we're not sure whether the proposal will be effective. The government seems to simply enact a piece of legislation, but doesn't seem to expect any results, and I'm very disappointed. The proposed regulation now seems to be putting the cart before the horse. It will require the public to to take the initiative, but it's not really deterring those people who are making such unsolicited P2P calls. In the media yesterday, there was a report teaching people how to interrupt such unsolicited P2P calls. Why doesn't the government think about this? That is, why don't the government come up with apps which is free of charge to educate the public how to actually stop receiving such unsolicited P2P calls. I think if the government was to put in such an effort and it's not going to work, why doesn't the government consider the alternative? Mr. Yao, I think what Mr. Chen Cheng-ying said is not very fair to the government. All along regarding telemarketing through P2P calls, I remember in April last year, the government said that if we want to proceed with this proposal, we cannot ensure that we can achieve 100%, a solution that is 100% effective. We also told members what are the difficulties that we expect. But given the circumstances, the different political parties have requested government to enact legislation, and we have therefore adopted, a solution which in the past has proven to be effective to stop such, unsolicited messages. So I think we need to have a thorough discussion. The alternative solutions proposed by Mr. Chan certainly can be pursued. If somebody were to use certain softwares, of course we can continue to do that. Last time when I was here, I heard members telling the administration that we should, take the legislative route. Mr. Shukafai, first of all, I appreciate that members don't want the public to be, affected by these unsolicited calls. But we all know that in recent years, 90% of these calls come from banks promoting the financial services. Mr. Chen Cheng-ying has already put it very clearly that the banks will only make warm calls, that they will only call you after you have given them the authorization. They will not make cold calls. So those who make such calls are actually intermediaries and finance companies pretending to be banks. So the proposed legislation is targeting against these people. The government now talk about the opt-in mechanism. That is, if we register a number, then the caller cannot make that call to our number. If a company were to call such a number on the DNC register, for those people who are doing business, when we make calls to promote our products, we can't do it. So what are the industries that will be affected? Fruit, wholesaler, seafood distributors, tea leaves, flour, eggs, vegetables, rice, seafood distributors. They all need to call up the restaurants, the hotels, and the market store operators, and they won't do that. For traditional herbal Chinese medicine, they cannot call distributors, they cannot call up the Chinese medicine. Same for the architects, the beauty parlors, medical equipment, they can't call the hospitals. Pharmaceutical companies cannot call up the hospitals. Same for beauty parlors, hair salons, florists, selling flowers to shopping malls, restaurants, and so on. Jewelry shops, they can't call the jewelry shops. the watch wholesalers can call up the watch retailers. Same for those selling electrical appliances. They cannot call up the electronic, goods vendors. My colleague have asked your colleague, and we understand that there is a machine that we can use to check. But in Hong Kong, we have 300,000 companies, who have, made business registration. In other words, we have 30,000 companies paying $1,000, $6,000 to pay you to set up this equipment. Let's say more people were to chip in, or we cannot make those calls, so the system that you propose, I think you have to ensure that in other jurisdictions there are similar rules in place. Those who call Hong Kong are not from the Philippines or India. All of them come from the mainland. Many of these people make calls from Guangdong. And your proposed regulation simply cannot regulate those callers. If all the companies have to spend more money, and they will refrain from making such calls, but those in the mainland continue to make such calls, they continue to pretend to be banks. If we're going to spend so much resources on that, but in the end we still receive such unsolicited calls, why don't you, find the callers directly? Mr. Leung, I think 70% of the calls I receive, don't reveal the caller identity. So it's not possible that we don't take those calls. For all the people who do business in Hong Kong, they have to, make a contribution, and in the end, you wouldn't be able to solve the problem. So I don't understand the rationale here. We've been electoral members, and I've been an electoral member and district council for so long, but I can tell you that the proposal cannot really solve the problem. Don't just submit a bill to us and think that can solve the problem. Mr. Yao. Mr. Sukafai made two specific points, or asked two questions. Is it like what Mr. Yu said, that nobody will be able to make calls? And secondly, the person who pretends to be, say, representing a particular industry, Mr. Leung, to answer Mr. Yu's question. I think we have to go back to the spirit of the bill, which basically targets against P2P calls. My recollection is that Mr. Siu was referring to business calls. Under the framework of this legislation, I don't think we are proposing to regulate commercial, activities or behavior. Now, sorry, why don't you wait until the administration is finished? You've already overrun, and other members are waiting for the turn. Now, secondly, the members said that callers with fake identities, and 99% of these are intermediaries. We do not have any evidence to confirm whether or not 90% of these callers indeed use fake identities. For those who use such fake identities, they would already be in breach of criminal offences. And if you receive such, callers with fake identities, I don't think they should, complain to the communication authority. They should complain to the police instead. Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, we still have 6 more members to ask the questions, and I'll exercise very stringent time management because we have another meeting scheduled to follow this one.
Ma Fong Kwok. So the PowerPoint, so the first slide mentioned to regulate calls of a commercial nature, for example, hospital public services under urgent situations calling it in charitable organizations, the education institution undergoing education research not regulated. Let me declare that also engaging in policy research and opinion poll, then they're probably not an academic institution, but rather non-profit making. So we shall be collecting the public opinion, for example, by randomly assigned calls and also by P2P, would that be regulated in the future? I see that there's an important tool for policy research and collective public opinion. You haven't had any mention of it, so how you plan to deal with it? Mr. Leung. So under the UEMO, this opinion survey and questionnaires are outside the regulatory ambit. In our proposal, the framework will be extended to P2P telemarketing calls. We have no plan to see those, to put them under regulation. And what we emphasize that is a call of a commercial nature and making an offer and to advertising or promoting goods, services, land, and business opportunities. Thus, as opinion polling and so forth by Mr. Ma wouldn't be excluded. So you can refuse to take any P2P telemarketing calls. So if they choose to opt out, would they also exclude it from opt out of opinion pollings or allow them to opt out of certain type of calls? If you allow them opt out across the board and rule that all the public policy research and the polling institution may have findings distorted. Okay, maybe I didn't make myself clear enough. So our proposed legislative framework will exclude the pollsters, even if the number is registered in the DNC register. For the banks or the academic institutions or a think tank can still continue to call those registered for opinion polling. Next, Mr. Charles Mark. I support it in principle since we've been discussing for so many years. It's just to plug a major loopholes. In 2007, looking back, there was a thinking that it should have been included together back then. For this past decade or so, this is obviously a legislative loophole for a decade hold that people will resort to P2P telemarketing calls. Now for this amendment, you standardized about the penalty as well, the Hong Kong link and so forth. I see it as a reasonable approach. I'm also concerned that the UEMO isn't, unlike the Secretary said, have been effective. I see there are many cases there whether there will be sufficient enforcement powers for your penalty levels. In your proposal, you claim that the advice letter to be happen consecutively and frequently, and then there will be enforcement notice, a violation of the convention notice. They will finally get to the $100,000 penalty. So it's not that I'm asked to be penalized at the first offense, but I see that the whole process will be very long, which made the public feel that it's useless to file complaints, and this is still continuing. In terms of the penalty, how do you ensure that it's effective in real? And for the legislative timetable, I hope that it could be further sped up. While you claim that since we waited for so long and 2 more years isn't that much. However, for this black hole, why don't we just get it over and done with? There are other enforcement details, but probably I will not discuss them here today. I just hope that the government can legislate ASAP instead of due to isolated objections for the business actors. So because the public have been waiting it for so long. And the UEMO has been effective is to ensure to give the opportunity to the public to resort to the DNC register to reduce nuisance and not rely entirely on enforcement, because if we register and unregister, and then and your email, and also for the promotional channels, they will choose the easy path. They will not try risk breaking the law. So give the public a way and achieve the legislation. We need to strike a balance. Just not more than member of one sector have raised it to some concern. So we have to strike a balance. The penalties, it can be excessive. Otherwise, they will have a undue pushback and also make business difficult. So in past, the UMO is have been helpful. As for the details like penalties, this can be discussed, and of course, we have to make it clear from the outset. Let's say if we need to take this step, the evidence taking must be done by the subject, so that the government can't force them. So we try to strike a balance among different views. In my opening remarks, I said, especially this joint meeting. So again, I would like to get an overall opinion from you to whether the government should take the legislative approach. I hope that the panels can give us a clear direction. Nothing further? Good. With 4 members lining up. Mr. Xu to second round. I need to draw the line. If no objection, let's start. Mr. Wang Ting-Kwang. On regulating P2P telemarketing calls is long overdue. Back in 2007, when the UEMO was first drafted, the DAB tried to move its ESA on P2P calls, and they were criticized by Mr. Fong Kong and Democratic Party, and our CSA was voted down. So now that for you to try to remedy, it's still not too late, and so you can tackle the problems of midnight P2P calls, especially those with fax machines. After the passage of the UEMO, upon registering on the register, I'm no longer bothered by the midnight faxes, or let's say wake up in the mornings to see a pile of fax on my floor. This was so annoying. I see this is effective, and now you decide to step up regulation of P2P marketing calls, so that I don't get to receive calls during electrical meeting, and when the beauty parlor called me and this note as the other side is a guide, they wouldn't say anything. And for page 3.2, well, it claimed it has dropped. It's just we can't. In complaints is allowed by law because we're so used to being harassed. So legislation is the right way. So by way of opt-out, what if they do robocalls by random sampling? So how can opt-out stop them from making those calls? Can we deal with this through modern technology? Now that you have the DNC register, and together with the P2P call register, those all the faxes and so forth already been registered, and together with P2P calls, they all should deal with it totally. What if they do so by random sampling? I don't know how you can stop those calls. For the proposed legislation you've been now consulting, I'm so anxious that when can it be tabled to let go for its first, second reading? Let me answer the first question. We have concluded the consultation back in last April, the panel had gave us a general direction before we embark on consultation. If the panels have agreed with the direction through legislation and then the way we propose, then we shall draft a law, and then we shall table the amendment bill to LegCo. That's the most direct way. As for Mr. Wong's mention around robocalls, I'll defer to Mr. Leung. So part of the proposed provision will ban the use of email or phone number harvesting softwares. The penalty is even more severe. There will actually be a prison sentence. Well, when they obtain a new phone number, they have to check against the do not call or P2P list. If it's on the list, it shouldn't be making the call to that number. So by way of random sampling or choosing the number by human has no difference. As long as it's registered on the DNC register, whether you're by random sampling, there will be an offense. Next, Dr. Elizabeth Quat. We received countless complaints on P2P telemarketing calls. Like Mr. Wong said, we've been requesting the early regulation of P2P telemarketing by legislation. For this proposed legislation, I'm supported, and those of the business sector want the government to clarify. How about the B2B calls? Business to business. Let's say one company calling the other. So if business numbers will be excluded, because this time you don't plan to regulate on B2B market calls. Mr. Leung, in our proposed regulatory framework, we didn't differentiate personal or B2C or B2B or C2C. So in terms of the register in the DNC register, the phone owner had expressly indicated that they were unwilling to accept this telemarketing calls. If the recipient is a company, they want to refuse calls for personal service, we should respect the desire of the company. And members mentioned of the potentially B2B calls. We can discuss with the business sector and under what circumstances how we can affect the normal business and operations with the
修訂嘅。
In the proposed amendment, we are willing to discuss this issue with the business sector. Also, for any piece of legislation, if it were to affect the business sector, we will actually discuss the issue at the Business Facilitation Committee to ensure that normal business transactions will not be affected. See, in Singapore and Australia, they also have a system of the DNC register, but for business telephone numbers, it's not covered. In Hong Kong, we also have, commercial fixed line numbers. Would you, take out the fixed line business number so that we can also regulate these unsolicited B2B calls? I have received many complaints of people, who is subject to nuisance because of such calls to the mobile phones. But I've not received any complaints from companies saying that they don't want to receive any such unsolicited, calls. Now, first of all, in Hong Kong, indeed, we don't differentiate between, private and business lines. For many people doing business, they will also give others their mobile phone number. Mr. Wong's major complaint is that he's receiving such unsolicited messages or calls at home. But no, I'm talking about companies. We don't make that distinction. If you suggest that from now on we will differentiate telephone numbers between business lines and private lines, this is what done at the moment. Now, even if the bill becomes law, let's say if somebody were doing business and and he may be willing to take, many calls. But if things that recently he's been subject to lots of nuisance, especially from a particular source, then he can register his number and actually, opt out from such calls. So I don't want to dwell on this debate as to what is commercial and what is private numbers. So if businesses want to receive such calls, they don't need to register. But if they don't want to receive such calls, they can register, and then they wouldn't be subject to the nuisance. Okay. We two members of Nord in this room, Mrs. Siu Ka-fei will now go for a second round, 3 minutes. The Bureau, when it responded to Madam Quartz's question, he said that if a company wants to call up a client and that client is already registered on the DNC register, the company would likely break the law. I already said earlier on that all kinds of businesses in Hong Kong will be affected by this piece of regulation, and they will be subject to regulation, and it's possible that they might break the law. In some cases, for example, insurance company practitioners, they may need to update the policy with their clients, and if they make any calls, they could be in breach. For real estate, agents, if they want to promote any, piece of property to the customers, again, they might break the law. Even if everybody, follow your requirement, they pay $1,600 and they check the DNC register. But you're not covering calls from outside of Hong Kong. In other words, in future, people from outside of Hong Kong continue to make these calls and cause nuisance. So after you've enacted this piece of legislation, you wouldn't be able to help us who are still receiving such calls. And the cost for Hong Kong as a whole will go up. So is it really worth it? Mr. Wong Ting Kwong said that previously we were bombarded by all these unsolicited calls and so on, and the UEMO has actually helped, tackle that problem. Of course, it caused a lot of nuisance previously when people, actually bombard people with these unsolicited fax messages. But this time your proposal will not work because the callers very often will pretend to be calling from banks and so on. And previously, people who make unsolicited fax messages, the message will come with the identity of the sender. But if the caller pretends to represent a finance company, you can't trace that person. So you wouldn't be able to achieve anything, and the entire business sector will suffer. Nobody seems to have come forward to complain yet because they don't know too much about the details of your proposal. What you're proposing will certainly affect the entire, business environment. Chairman, I understand Mr. Siu Ka-fei's concern, but I also have a suggestion. I don't think Mr. Siu should, say that our present proposal is entirely, will not serve any purpose at all. We have other members present here today with a commercial background. We are proposing this framework because if there are certain areas where we are not able to achieve any results, we are willing to make amendments. Mr. Siu Ka-fei said that among different industries, they may have business connections, and with this proposal, approved, then they will not be able to make costs. I just want to point out, why is it that for people who are in doing business, they will not, opt themselves out on the. Now, the recipient of the call will not complain against the caller if the call is about a normal business transaction, and also there would be a reasonable defense on the part of the caller. So Mr. Siu shouldn't, take this to the other extreme as to how we should deal with this problem. Indeed, this is a difficult problem. Can we screen out all the telephone calls, as in the case of the UEMO? The UEMO indeed has helped, but it's not 100% effective. We all agree on that. So by relying on legislation the question is whether or not we agree to take this route. And if so, the proposal is relatively simple. And I'm happy to talk to Mr. Siu and people from the business sector as to how we can allay the concerns expressed by Mr. Siu. But at this stage, I don't agree that this proposed legislation is totally useless. I'm sure other members here may not agree with that either. I've already, drawn the line, so I wouldn't be able to accommodate Mr. Hui Chi Feng's request. Mr. Wu Chi Wai, well, we need to finish at 11:30. Okay, 1 minute. I think I will be very strict. Okay. I think stepping up the regulation of unsolicited P2P calls would be would address several major concerns of the public. Finance companies, calls from finance companies, beauty parlors. So there are specific areas here we're looking at. Mr. Sukafai said that different types of business behavior may be affected, and I believe this is not the purpose of the proposed legislation. I also agree that the most thorny issue here is that when I don't think we would agree on the principle. Indeed, we need to tackle the problem, and there are many such calls which are nuisance. But before we see the blueprint of the bill, it's difficult for us to to discuss all the possible scenarios, under this blueprint. I think we should first agree. I think we all agree on the direction to take. That is, we need regulation, but at the same time, we don't want to actually hurt the innocent, and we don't want normal business, transactions to be affected, like wholesalers, calling their customers and so on. So, wonder you can give us a blueprint of the bill. I'm not talking about the principles. I'm talking about the blueprint, so that we can first, look at the terminologies you propose to use, so that we would be able to explore the way forward before we can strike the right balance. So this is my request, Mr. Yao. I'd like to thank Mr. Wu for his comment. We agree with Mr. Wu. Certainly, we don't want to hurt those who are innocent, and I don't believe the point raised by Mr. Xiu will actually happen. If that were so, I think everybody would be against the proposal. As I said, this is more or less our blueprint. But to answer Mr. Wu's question, for the next step, we will proceed to draft the bill and submit it to LegCo. What I mean is that before you go to the Bills Committee, we would like to see the blueprint first. And in that blueprint, well, this is exactly the blueprint. And for the next step, we will be working on the draft bill. I'm asking whether or not you can give us the bill earlier. So long as members agree, we're willing to do that. I think this is where we, disagree. Well, these are the principles and directions of your proposed legislation. I'm talking about the bill itself. I think we might need to have a consultation based on a white paper. I don't think that's necessary. Chairman, in your summary, if you say that this panel supports the government's proposal to proceed to legislation, then we will proceed to draft the bill and submit it to LegCo, and then members can discuss the details. I think each and every time when the bill is ready, a lot of the debates and arguments will take place as we scrutinize the bill. So if possible, I hope that before you go to the Bills Committee, we would be able to see the bill so that we can give you our inputs earlier. So, Mr. Wu, if you have any specific proposals, I think you can talk to the administration. I think the paper already laid down the direction. I think we still have a little time. Mr. Hui Feng, you have 1 minute, and Ms. Mo 1 minute. Okay? I will also need time to sum up. Okay, Mr. Hui. I agree that we shouldn't, hurt the innocent. But we also need to ask whether or not the proposal will have create sufficient deterrence. For the notification, enforcement notification mechanism, everyone can make one mistake. But we all know that if you have 10 telecom courier, if they people, call me up once, then you need to make investigation, in respect of each of the telecom company. That in the end, I still will be subject to a lot of nuisance. As a business, so if I were the caller, I wouldn't be so worried because I at least have one chance. So in paragraph 17, you say that this will add to the difficulty of enforcement. So if the caller only make the mistake once, and shouldn't you also provide for a penalty? Ms. Mo, thank you. In principle, I fully agree with the government that the government should regulate such unsolicited P2P calls by way of legislation. I myself have been subject to lots of such nuisances, especially callers, the number of which begins with the digit 3. Last week, when I saw a number starting with the digit 3, I was intending to scold the caller. In the end, it turned out to be a very important call. So I thought that it was a very serious matter. It has been reported in the news that people don't take calls coming from a public hospital because the number begins with the digit 3. So in the final analysis, I don't think you should interrupt me if I'm talking. I'd just like to remind the government that you shouldn't hurt the innocent. You've heard the concerns of those representing the business sector. They are worried that you might be overzealous in enforcing the law. I'm sure the government has heard that. So if I may sum up, I note that the majority of members in principle agrees that the government should proceed with the legislation and come up with a bill as soon as possible. So if there are no further views, the government can proceed, accordingly. Mr. Siu has expressed certain reservations. I hope the administration will liaise more with Mr. Siu in order to allay the concerns of the profession or industry. With that, I think we may adjourn. Thank you.